Welcome to the Help and Hope podcast. I'm Sharon Betters, and my co host Heidi Nequist is here with me. And we are excited about this podcast that's produced by Mark Inc. Ministries, especially the conversation that we're going to be having today with Nate Brooks. I believe that caregivers are probably one of the most forgotten communities in our culture. Thousands and thousands of people every single day get up and take care of someone that they love. No matter how tired they are, no matter how hard it is, they find a way. And yet sometimes they hit that wall where they just don't even know how they're going to keep on going. And so our guest today is Nate Brooks, and he has written a wonderful book called Disrupted Journey. I hope you can see it, Disrupted Journey. And it is, I want to make sure I get this right, walking with your loved one through chronic pain and illness. And Heidi, I know you and I are so excited about having this conversation with Nate Brooks. And Nate is an associate professor of counseling. I want to get this right at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. He is also the director of Courage Christian Counseling, which provides virtual counseling for people working through trauma, abuse, grief, and loss. And he is not only the author of the book we're going to be talking about today, he is the author of Identifying Heart Transformation, Exploring Different Kinds of Human Change, and he is the co author of Help, Our Sex Life is Troubled by Past Abuse. So, friends, as you're listening or watching, you know that Nate has a lot of experience in helping others, but he also has a pathway where he knows what it is like to need the help of others. So, Nate, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon and Heidi, for having me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time.
Great.
So, Nate, as the director, I'm sorry, as a counselor with Courage Christian Counseling, which is virtual counseling platform. First of all, deviate just for a second. What came first, the counseling or the caregiving?
So, courage and caregiving happen simultaneously.
Mm,
Uh, so I've done counseling for a very long time,
mhm,
but as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later, about 3 years ago, my wife, after childbirth, had a surgical procedure that was supposed to be normal
mm,
and just simply didn't recover from it.
mm,
And it totally disordered our lives. We dealt with a lot of chronic pain and illness from her before this, but really that was that was the biggest wave in the chronic pain and illness tsunamis that we've dealt with.
Mm,
And very quickly, we went from being, I guess, just a really standard, when you think of the classic, what does American Christian family look like, which isn't necessarily normal, but maybe what pops in head, like I worked, my wife stayed home with our kids. We were homeschooling at that time, not because we think it was the only way, but she had degrees in early childhood education and enjoyed doing it. And all of a sudden, we went from just that lifestyle to her doing 12 to 14 hours of physical therapy a day. She didn't leave our home for 18 months,
mm,
except to go to doctor's appointments, and that was a real rough go. And
mm,
all of a sudden, we had to figure out what to do with our children, who were very young at the time. I think kindergarten and first grade,
mm,
and then we had a baby also. And
mm,
so all of a sudden, I needed to make enough money for us to send our kids to the local private Christian school, as we were just
mm,
in an area where perhaps we didn't feel like the local school system would have been the best fit for our kids in terms of where we were living at the time. And so I needed to make an additional like $800 a month or
mm,
so. And I thought, man, what do I have in terms of skills? Well, I could drive for Uber, or I could see about turning some of the counseling I was doing pro bono into being actually paid counseling.
mm,
And it was, Lord, we're sending our kids here because the circumstances that you've brought in our life requires us to reorder how we're living.
mm,
And we trust that you will provide what we need. And slowly, there's one client and then another client and then another client, and the Lord met those needs. And in the span of about 2 years, We went from one counselor to 10 counselors
Wow.
as really the realities of abuse and trauma. Um, there was a desperate need for biblically faithful, trauma informed counseling,
Mm.
Yeah.
and then also the chronic pain and illness category as well. So our practice grew significantly, and I'm so blessed to work with a wonderful group of people. Essentially, what I've done, I'm a seminary professor first and foremost, is bring on board my best students over the years.
Mm.
That's
And
amazing.
so,
Yeah.
we don't hire rookies. We bring on people that know what they're doing. And I think the Lord's really blessed that. And that's one of the greatest joys of my life to give my students the ability, once they've graduated, most of them in their 40s and 50s, kind of second career thing. They've got a lot of life wisdom to turn around and actually use their talents and gifts for the glory of God.
Mm. And we will have that, how to contact Courage, is it Courage Counseling? Is
Yeah,
that what
Courage
it's called?
Christian
Courage
Counseling.
Counseling, to contact Nate on, in the show notes on our website at markinc.org. So, that's amazing how God has done that, Nate.
Mm,
We're grateful.
me too.
You said that you were talking about how your family life went from traditional Christian family, and I actually wrote that down. You said from open, available, and energetic to surviving, isolated, and exhausted.
Mm,
And that just real like, I think I read that multiple times. I read it over and over, and then I wrote it down because I think that is the sum of, I mean, that is the nutshell
Hmm.
of what you deal with on a regular basis. So for people who are finding themselves there from what would be considered normal to a new normal that isolates them or, creates that distance, where do you start when it comes to understanding and being okay with the uncomfortable?
mm,
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny we talk about new normals.
Mm,
Anytime we're talking about new normal, it's always an inferior version of what used to be,
sure.
right? No one talks about, no one uses the phrase, well, my new normal is that I'm far happier than I was beforehand.
That's a good
Uh,
point.
we use those phrases, I think, in some ways to convince ourselves, I can do this, I can survive, I'll be okay.
Hmm.
And, Heidi, I don't think there's an easy way to do this. The
Mm,
question is, where do you start? The answer is everywhere all at once.
hmm.
um, because when life gets totally disrupted by a new medical diagnosis, or perhaps we're just slowly stepping down from plateau to plateau to plateau as certain different issues that people can deal with, whether it be cognitive diminishment or increasing physical impairment, some combination of both. Sometimes those can be a slow fade as much as a
Mm,
sudden diagnosis or a sudden
mm,
trouble that comes upon you.
mhm,
mm,
It Each one of those interrupts life in a way that's tough to predict. And I think it depends on where you're at in life too, right? Like we're a family with young kids. My kids are about to turn 10, about to turn 8, and then about to turn 4,
mm.
or actually just turned 4. How could I forget the sparkly unicorn party that we had 2 weeks ago? Uh, and so for us, that looked different, right? The first thing that we thought about is how do we take care of our kids?
Right.
And so so one of the things that when life gets disrupted, it's in some ways immediately clarifying for what are your highest values.
Mm,
And for us, it was we want to raise our kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And so, what does that look like?
mm,
And so we called my mother-in-law, who is free to come, and
Mm,
basically said, we need you here.
mm,
And she basically took care of the kids' school, like after school, all of that type of stuff.
mm,
mm,
And I made sure that we had enough income coming in to sustain family life. And my wife
mm,
focused on getting better
mm,
mm.
as best as she could. And that was upheaval for everybody.
Yeah.
And yet in those first days, those first months, the question was what needs to happen now?
Mhm.
mm,
And we could worry about we could worry about how are we going to do this when kids are older? how are we going to do this when, like, my wife and I are aging, at the age of
Mm,
80 or something like that? Those thoughts can wait. The question is, what do we
mm,
need to do right now to survive so that
mhm,
tomorrow there's food on the table, the kids are getting educated, and we still love
mhm.
Jesus and each other?
Yeah.
So that's where we started. And for folks, it's going to look different, right? If you've got a couple that kids are out of the house and there's something catastrophic that happens, the first question may be, what do we need to do to think about shuffling jobs, employment? Maybe a church community group that you lead part of. Like, you may need to renegotiate that first. But I
Right.
think where you start is really dependent on where you're at in life.
Right.
For sure. For sure. One thing that I know of in my life is that theology matters. It
Hmm.
absolutely is the grid through, what's your worldview? What is the grid
Hmm.
through which you view all of life? And you write in on page 11, you wrote, "Gone is the uncluttered relationship with God, where his rule means that things generally turn out okay, and the standard of human life is happiness. Pain and chronic illness are the backdrop for the movie of our life." And then in another passage in the book, you're talking about suffering well. Now, I want to suffer well. What does that look like?
Hmm.
Paul writes about persevering, don't quit, all of those things. And then there's the parallel line of lament.
Hmm.
Um, which one is suffering well? Talk to us about what does it mean to suffer well in through the context of your theology, through the grid of your theology.
That's a huge question, isn't it, Sharon?
That's a
Mhm.
huge question.
It is.
I've
So
already
just
fi-
give
I've
us
already
give us
figured out that you're the ringer here. Heidi sets up the nice happy questions, and then Sharon comes in with the death stroke here.
no, I wanna hear what I want our listeners to hear what you because I think the way that you pulled it together is the reality of I mean, I could see it in my own life,
Mhm.
so I wanna hear what you have to say. I want our listeners to hear it too.
If there's one thing so my wife and I've been married for 12 years. We've had 11 and a half years of chronic pain and illness.
Mm,
Um, and the last four or so have been particularly acute. If there's one thing that I've walked away or continue to walk away from it with, it's just an understanding that our relationship with God isn't linear. It's not one step forward, one step forward, one step forward. There are things that get clarified, and then there's things that get cluttered, and then some of the clutter is cleared away, and then other things get cluttered and clarified in the rest. So, you know, I think as a summary statement, I can say for myself, I am less sure about more things in life.
mm,
I'm less sure about more things about God than I used to be.
mhm,
Um, God's more of a mystery, and I say that as someone who is part of my job as a seminary professor. I've signed some pretty weighty conservative, orthodox theological statements, and I believe them with all my heart.
mhm,
And yet, at the same time, the experience of them is more complicated than it used to be, right? Um, I remember some particularly dark times around Easter last year, so about a year ago, and it was during a downturn in my wife's health, and it was really hard sitting in the Easter service and hearing people clap and cheer,
mm,
and me feeling like God made no sense. Right, that Jesus got it from the dead, sure, but my wife is falling apart literally piece by piece.
mm.
I think she had 70 doctor's appointments last year.
Wow.
And
Mm,
and that's a mystery, right? Because if any of my children were suffering, I'd step in and help them. And yet God doesn't do that. And
mhm,
he has the power to do it, but he chooses not to. And so navigating that world between if we believe God is absolutely sovereign and yet we also believe he's good, I'm not as sure how to put the pieces of that together as I used to be.
mm,
I believe those two things, but they're more paradox. We think about the theological term theodicy, right? The problem of evil. Uh, Most of the books that are written on that topic are written on the philosophical level. How can God be good and allow evil? Those books don't really scratch the itch of what it's like day to day to watch someone you love fall apart.
yeah.
So I'm less certain about how the pieces go together, but I think the things that I am certain on, I'm more certain than ever before. Right? I'm more certain on the things in the ancient creeds and confessions. I
Mm,
do believe in God the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth. And that is, I'm more convinced of that than ever before.
mm,
And in terms of the navigating the categories of lament and suffering, well, you tossed out a few different options, and I think the answer is yes, Sharon, to
mm,
all of them. Right? So lament is a necessary and important part of living life in a very damaged universe. There are sorrows, there are troubles that befall us, and we're meant to be sad about them. Right?
mm,
If I am happy over what has occurred to my wife, that's actually a sign of being disordered, not of following God's heart. Because Christ weeps over Lazarus dying, he doesn't shout with exultation. Christ did not skip to the cross saying, "Yes, I can't wait to do this." He mourned and cried great tears and was in anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane. And if we really believe that Jesus is the most emotionally healthy person who ever lived, those feelings, those struggles are something that we are meant to experience in the deep suffering of our life as well. And we look at the Psalms. Psalm 88 ends with, "Darkness is my only friend."
mm,
And those are words in our holy book that are not rebuked. At the same time, I have a colleague, or had a colleague at a previous institution, a fellow named Bob Cara, and he used to say all the time in classes, "We want to be balanced as the Bible is balanced."
mm,
And I think that's a really good word for us.
mm,
Is that lament is an essential part of the Christian walk, especially in the category of chronic pain and illness. It is not the only thing, right? If we want to think of a journey, right? Lament is a tree that we see planted all over the place, like a pine tree. But
mm,
there's not just pine trees, there's also deciduous trees
mm,
that are important as well. And so, I think for us, a lot of life looks like a lament paired with the promise that God's grace is new, God's mercies are new every morning for us. There's a lot of nights that Kate and I look at each other and say, it's a good thing it's bedtime because we're about out of mercy. But the good news is we get a new cup of mercy tomorrow because his mercies are
mm,
new every morning.
mm,
And
mm,
then also the reality that our eternal hope is not here. And I think sometimes as American Christians, where life is generally easy on the whole, now I'm not minimizing anybody's suffering. Uh,
mm,
I've I've taught overseas some. I actually used to go to Ukraine and teach. A number
mm,
of my students are in the Ukrainian military right now. Right, that is objectively a harder reality than I face here. So when I say, on the whole, American Christians' lives tend to be easier than the average life across history. That's what I'm looking at. Recognizing that, like, chronic pain and illness pushes us into a category that isn't necessarily as normal for our culture, and that
mm,
pushes us more strongly to understand that our ultimate hope is in the prayer, "Come quickly, Lord Jesus."
mm,
I think when I was in my early 20s, I didn't understand why the Bible ended with a prayer that Jesus come quick. There were so many things I wanted to do in life,
mm, mm,
and fast forward many years later, I wonder why that phrase doesn't show up more in the Bible.
mm.
Because that is our ultimate plea. And I think that type of all pervasive, life altering suffering drives us to the place that the book of Revelation ends, which is a plea, "Lord Jesus, come quickly."
Yeah. There's several things that I'm resonating with all of what you're saying. But when our 16-year-old son Mark and his friend Kelly were in a fatal car accident,
Hmm.
um, those I'm a Bible study teacher. I'm a pastor's wife. And I remember in the hospital thinking, Lord, I know what people are going to expect from me, and maybe you even expect it, but I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to be who I am.
Hmm.
I'm going to grieve transparently,
Hmm.
and I'm not hiding it. And I know you're up to something. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to cooperate with you. That was my reaction, that night, and I meant it. I meant every word of it, and I lamented openly, and back then, there weren't a lot of books on lamenting. Today, there's beautiful books, beautiful, beautiful teachings. People encourage lament. Back then, they didn't encourage it. It was like fingernails on a blackboard. But every time I would speak, there would be women who would come up to me in
Mm,
tears and say, I've been sitting in the church pew for years, and I'm scared to say, I don't understand what God is doing. I'm grieving, and I'm scared to say what's really happening. And so it really, and my husband is a pastor. He said, I have to work every day with the one who took my son. I
mhm,
have to work through this and reconcile God's love with his sovereignty, which is what I hear you saying. And so I appreciate you saying there is a tension there, that we're never going to come to that point.
mhm,
Oh, I got it. Now I got it.
yeah,
But we are, I keep saying, I'm on my way home, capital H. And I remember Heidi, we used to say every day, this would be a good day for you to come, Jesus. This is the day you should come today,
mhm,
because that was our only hope, and it is our hope,
yeah.
for.
I'm so sorry that that's part of y'all's story. I didn't know that that was part of it. But the chronic pain and illness world is my reality, my family's reality. But in no way, shape, or form is the only life altering reality.
Oh,
Right? We can
yeah.
things happen and life won't be the same again.
Yeah. And also, grief is grief and
Hmm.
loss is loss. It may look different in somebody else's life, but it's still, and the principles of scripture, the God's character, all of those, they apply to every single
Hmm.
place of deep sorrow and deep
Hmm.
grief.
Yeah.
So, that's one reason I think I resonated so much
Mhm.
with your story, because the similarities of the struggles to, find a way to keep
Mhm.
going, to keep going.
Yeah. I like to think of it like having slightly different accents or speaking slightly different
Mm.
dialects. Right. So I'm originally a Californian,
Mm.
and moving here to the South, I remember when I was in seminary, I moved into the dorms, and there was a fella from Kazakhstan, and there was another fella from Eastern Kentucky. And I had an easier time understanding the fella from Kazakhstan than I did the fella from Eastern Kentucky, because that was just a level of accent I hadn't ever heard,
Right.
y'all, uh,
Y'all, y'all.
in in my native tongue. And that's I think that's a little bit like what grief is,
Mhm.
where every human being is going to experience grief, but we have slightly different dialects of it, whether it being a child dying at the age of 16 or whether it being watch your wife fall to pieces as a young 30s mom. uh, those are those are different twangs on the same core language, and
Yep.
that is the beauty of scripture, is that it's able to speak into absolutely every nook and cranny and crevice
Yep.
of human life, because God is infinite and he writes to all experiences that we're able to have.
Yeah. Yes.
So, in your book, you say, I developed a habit of anesthetizing these passages, draining the horror out of them so that they'd better match my experiences. They became poetic overstatements of trouble, but that's not how they're written. I just hadn't suffered enough yet to understand them. Can you elaborate on that? I just hadn't suffered enough yet to understand them.
Sure.
Mhm.
So I think I wrote that specifically about many of the Psalms.
Yes.
Um, there's horrible, horrible things in the Psalms. I
Yeah.
mentioned one earlier: "Darkness is my only friend."
Yeah.
Uh, "You've made my teeth grind in gravel."
Yeah.
I mean, you push into some of the really scary stuff, like "Blessed is the one who kills the Babylonians' children," type
Right.
stuff. And I remember being just younger,
Mhm.
early 20s, early 30s, and I didn't understand. I had a hard time taking those passages and applying them to anything in my life,
Yeah.
because they all felt overstated. I mean, sure, I'd been bumped around some, right? Like people are mean, bad
Mm,
things happen. I lost a job working at a restaurant, as a server. That was a big thing for a,
mm,
21-year-old me who
mm,
never failed at anything before in his life. Uh, right? Like, but I'm not gonna stand up and be like, I got fired from Odyssey World Cafe because there wasn't enough business. Darkness is my only friend. Like, that's a
Right.
really strong overreaction, pretty clearly, right? Or,
Right.
I had a friend who just kind of eventually ghosted me.
mm,
Bring his head down in his tent in blood. Well, that's a little. I mean, ooh, that's a little too much.
mm,
Um, but uh so those psalms, I always had to almost like take them down several notches in order for it to feel like it landed. But when Kate went through multiple medical challenge, some caused by medical system, some just naturally occurring due to genetics, uh, that took my world apart. And all of a sudden, I realized that those passages were actually written for when the sky is indeed falling. Um, and so my and our experience of walking a valley of deep darkness that doesn't necessarily have an exit, all of a sudden that awakened my heart to far more scripture than I realized. And the Bible became more brilliant. And the Bible became more of a description, an honest description of human life than I had experienced before.
Mm. Did you feel like when it all started to, just like you said, you needed to do the next right thing, right? You needed to figure out how to make money. You needed to figure out who was going to care for the children. You needed to. At what point in the process did you realize I also need to grieve?
mm,
Uh, I think I knew it from the very beginning,
Mm,
and that's coming from the counseling background.
right.
mm,
Um, However, also I knew that I couldn't do it right then,
Mm,
um, because in many ways, grief is the luxury of someone
mm,
who has enough time and space to be able to do it.
right.
And I had an old my old youth leader. He was a retired lieutenant colonel from the Marines, and he actually led the first troops across the border for Desert Storm.
Wow.
And he told me once, "You can stand on your head in the corner for a day if you have to." And I remember looking at him and saying, "Okay, you're going to have to explain that to me."
Mm,
And he said, "You can do anything for a short period of time.
mm,
Can't do it for a long period of time, but you can do it for a short period of time."
mhm,
And I remember those first, 7, 8, 9 months. I probably got 3 hours of sleep a night. And most nights, Kate was dealing with a lot of nocturnal panic attacks. At that time, just a physiological stress response to the
mm,
amount of um, mental and physical distress she was in. And thankfully,
mm,
I knew what they were because of, again, the counseling background.
mm,
Was up with her most every night, middle of the night, just kind of helping her work through those things. And then there's not enough hours of the day to be around my kids and do two jobs at that point. And so there's probably a lot of 3 hours of sleep, night after night after night. And uh, like at that point, there was no space to grieve
mm,
because faithfulness required putting your head down or standing in the corner on your head, like John Fulberg used to tell me, and then knowing that there was a time that I'd have to pay the fiddler for it.
mm,
And so I remember about 9 months in, we had stabilized enough to the point that we had family rhythms back, right? Totally different family rhythms, but there was a little bit of space to breathe. And I remember I actually started meeting with a counselor. I'm a counselor myself. Doesn't mean that I'm able to navigate my own life without help at
mhm,
points. So I started meeting with a counselor and I told him, look, like our first meeting, look, I've got like 6 or 7 barrels of nuclear radioactive waste sitting on my
mm,
porch right now. And I've kept the lid on them because I know that as I open the lid, I'm going to come, I'm going to emotionally fall apart. And I haven't had the ability to do that until right now.
mm,
And so we need to start prying into these barrels, but we have to do it carefully because if I go to pieces, uh, we lose our house, right?
yeah,
Like we can't do that. But I also know that I'm 7 months into this. And if I don't start taking care of myself before the Lord, myself before others, myself internally, this is unsustainable. So that's going to look different for different people.
Mm,
I tend to be a good compartmentalizer and able to do that a little bit more. Some others not so much. Part of it's
mm,
knowing your own temperament and what you can handle. But there's times and places to pry open barrels, and then there's other times that you just have to leave those barrels untouched because right now
mm,
you need to care for something else first.
mm,
Yeah, that was one of my questions is how do you take care of yourself? And
Hmm.
I think that is you just gave a really good
Hmm.
mm.
explanation of how to recognize you have to do it at some point, but you have to take care of what's in front of you
Can I add one
first.
more thing to that, Sharon?
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that I actually heard this from somebody else, and it put words to something I had felt and done for a while. Um, I was actually watching. So my hobby is running ultra marathons. So
Mm,
races like 50 kilometers or more. I've got another one here in like 3 weeks,
mm,
and that's a weird sport. No one else needs to pick up my weird sport, but that's what I do for fun.
mm,
And
That
I
does
was
not sound fun to me at
mm,
all.
that's most people's response, and that's totally fair game.
But you do you.
I was watching a video of another Christian ultramarathoner whose infant son passed away,
mm,
and he made the comment in one of his videos that he did. He said, "Running these that hurt let me transfer some of the pain from my soul onto my physical body,"
Mm,
mm,
and I thought that was really wise
mm,
because God made us as body and soul. We're creatures that exist in real time and space and interact with the real world around us.
mm,
And so I actually didn't start doing the long distance running until this happened. And
mm,
it gave me a place where I could run off
mm,
my anger, frustration, sadness, sorrow, and then come back and be the
mm,
better version of me by God's help.
mm,
And that looks different for different people. But for me, that like making my physical body hurt, not in an injury way, but just in a hard way. That was
mm,
really helpful for me. I know others will take up painting and may paint
mm,
pretty ugly pictures
mm,
of black and red and aggressive brushstrokes and things like that. And it's a way to get the emotional sadness and sorrows out.
yeah.
And so I think that is a way, right? We don't do it unrighteously, right? I'm not saying go start cutting
Mm,
or or scream profanities at the sky, right? Like, no, we be righteous. But
mm,
sometimes we can think, excuse me, sometimes we can think that my spiritual anguish must always be dealt with in just a spiritual way.
mm,
But I would say if we really believe that God has built everything and everything is sacred, then sometimes the solution isn't to pour my heart out to God even more.
mm.
Sometimes the solution is to go find something else as an avenue to kind of decrease the pressure in the soul. I don't know if that makes sense at all, friends.
Makes a lot of sense.
a lot of sense. It
Mhm,
makes a lot of sense. So what I'm hearing 2 things that you've mentioned that are good care taking care of yourself is, a counselor,
Mhm.
finding a good counselor who can help you sort
Yeah.
through and process, at your pace, and then finding something where you can pour out some of those emotions in a healthy, righteous way, as you have said,
Yeah.
but making that time to do that because it's gonna make you better able, better
Mhm.
equipped to come back and do the next thing, to
Yeah.
do the next thing.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's something that my wife and I had to talk about some,
yeah,
right? And friends who are listening to this is something that you have to negotiate with the person that you care for.
mhm,
And part of love is being there for the long haul. And so if you get 3 years in and burn out, you're all of a sudden going to be a patient too, and that doesn't
yeah.
work.
And
And
you
so,
said,
yeah.
Nate, you also said, you addressed that about the long haul,
mhm,
that there comes a point where you're totally empty, weary. I didn't sign up for this. I
Mhm.
didn't sign up for this. But then you say, yeah, you did sign up for this. Can you
Yeah,
explain? What do you mean by that?
sure. I uttered words that have been uttered by many other men. Uh, Words that were to the effect of to having to hold from this day forward in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, till death do us part. And that's just a covenant I took with my wife before God and before a lot of witnesses.
Mm,
And so, suffering, it creates cracks in us. And just like an infection can get through the skin into the bloodstream, so too can the infection of sin get through the cracks
mm,
in our hearts that suffering produce. And one of those pathogens that burrowed into my soul was, this isn't fair, and I didn't sign up for this,
mhm,
but I did. And I had simply written a check that wound up being a lot larger than I thought.
mm,
And I remember that moment. It was raking leaves in the backyard of our acre back lot at that time. That was my wife's dream, to have a little bit more than just a postage stamp,
mm,
and had a lot of trees on it. She loved it. And then all of a sudden, she couldn't rake anymore. And I was
mm,
dealt with all these leaves. And I don't love yard work. I really detest it. Um,
mm,
and yeah, it was a dark day. And
mhm,
then all of a sudden, there was just that lightning bolt of God's conviction and the Holy Spirit that said, "Yeah, you did. You totally signed up for this. You set the
mm,
words. Like, those words are for now. It's
mm,
worse than you thought it would be, but those words are for now."
mm,
And it's the same thing, whether it be a husband or a wife, or aging parents or kids. We have responsibilities towards those around us, and I'm not discounting the fact that sometimes, right, this is my counselor for a second just coming out, right? Like,
mm,
there are some situations in which family cutoff happens for good, righteous, and necessary reasons. But
mm,
I'm talking on the majority, on the whole, there is this sense of responsibility for each other. And that can be hard, but we did sign up for it by virtue of our familial bonds.
yeah,
And you talk about in your book about the conversations that you and Kate have had to have so that you can be transparent with each other and say, I need to go on a run. Or she can say,
Mhm.
I need to work on my art. I need that space. And I think that that is something that gets really lost with caregivers, being able to say, I have to put myself first for a moment, if that's all I can do for a moment.
Yep.
Um, my very dear, very, very dear friends are dealing with, she's my best friend and her husband has Alzheimer's. And I told her I was going to
Mm,
mention her in this
mm,
podcast and she was fine with that. And, that's one of the things that we really have to force her to, you have got to take care of yourself, whatever it is. Go to the gym, go for a motorcycle ride, go sit outside at the water, do something that is not about him right now. And I think that that's a
mhm,
really hard, from everything I've read about Alzheimer's, about caregiving, about all these things, it's very, very hard to feel like it's okay to step away, even just for
mhm.
a little bit. But Jesus stepped away,
That's right.
mm,
you know?
That's
yeah,
right.
I mean, he took
And
time. If he needed to take time for prayer for himself, he stepped away,
mhm,
at times. And so I think we forget that.
it's
yeah,
really true. And it's, one of the things that I encourage people to think about is what are you able to do?
Right.
mm,
So, say your friend with Alzheimer's, and again, that's another just sad tale there, right? That God will make right in the end, but it's sad now.
mm,
Right.
And so, is there a friend who can come over and sit with that husband for
Hmm.
2 hours a week? An
Yep.
hour Thursday morning, an hour Friday morning,
Yep.
or Tuesday and Friday, right? And allow the wife to get out and go for a walk for
Yep.
45 minutes twice
Mhm.
twice a week, right? Like, those
Makes such a
sometimes we
difference.
can we can fall into the trap of thinking like we got to go big or go home. Well, no,
Right.
sometimes just those small little increments can be like, okay. Because what I find for me sometimes is like I might be having a real rough Tuesday, but I know that Friday is kind of my long run day, and I
Mm,
can just put that in the bank and then work on it when it comes to Friday, when I'm
mm,
out running in nature with the Lord.
mhm,
And it doesn't, like, it's just having that space to be able to say that's my processing time, that's my pour out my anguish to the Lord time, that's my fun time, that oftentimes can right? The Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. And
Mhm.
sometimes having that near hope allows us to work through things in the moment.
I
You
think
also talk about having different people that
mm,
you talk to about different subjects.
mhm, mm,
How does that work?
Yeah, I think anyone who's in the chronic pain and illness world realizes real fast that not everyone's totally safe to talk to about things.
mm,
Right.
So I think in the book I use the example of like a medical facility that maybe does a lot of work with diseases or something like that,
mm,
right? In a research facility. So anybody has the key card to get into the lobby and
mm,
talk to the receptionist.
mhm,
But you need a certain pass to get deeper in. Maybe a junior tech can get a couple layers in, but really at the end of the day, there's only a handful of people that are, allowed in the spot that you got to wear biohazard suits with deep in the vault
mm,
in this lab. And I think that's how we have to function as humans too. So
mm,
obviously, my wife and I are happy to talk about the fact that we deal with chronic pain and illness. Like we don't feel like we can be known by people unless people know that we deal with it because that's the
Mm,
biggest factor of our life,
mm,
uh, circumstantially. So that's like that's the lobby.
mm,
But asking the question, "How are you doing?"
mm,
I'll give a standard answer of, life's challenging at points. It's an up week or a down week. I'll
mm,
give that really standard answer to a lot of people that are beyond just like the casual acquaintances. Um, because that's fair and honest. That's that junior lab tech that's able to know, Nate's not having a great week.
mm,
Um, but a couple weeks ago was better. That's fine.
mm,
But that question, how are you doing? There's about three friends that when they ask that question, I'll let them know and I'll let them know everything.
yeah.
They're the people that I have that kind of relationship. That John Piper once said that a friend is someone that doesn't believe the best things that you say and doesn't believe the worst things that you say. And I
Mhm,
think that's a really good definition of a friend. I've got three friends like that I can call
mm,
and say, "Here's where I'm at." Filter it through the fact that I'm a Christian,
mm,
and you just learn pretty quickly who you can talk to and who you can't.
mm, for sure. Yeah.
mm,
One of the things that you I thought was interesting is there are two statements that you made is that let's see, deep suffering often provides fertile ground for suffering. That's one thing. But then you also say, friend, you are going to sin.
mhm,
And I feel like that's like two different lanes that you are going to sin. I mean, that's and I could give examples of, losing your patience, whatever
Sure.
it could be. We can all think of things we are going to sin. And then the second one, it's fertile ground for trouble. So I felt hopeful when you said you are going to sin. To me,
mhm,
that
Mhm.
was a statement of hope
Yeah,
because it's an acknowledgement. And then, but then the other is fertile ground for trouble. Can you kind of unpack those very briefly? Because you got to get the book, whoever is listening and watching, you have to get the book to I hope this is like Salty Peanuts where you say, I got to get that book. So you don't have to give the whole thing, but just give us a little taste of what's the difference there. What is the warning that you're throwing up?
I think it's just recognizing that when trouble happens, that gives rise to temptation to sin.
Hmm.
So suffering is fertile ground for trouble, right? We're going to be troubled by what has happened, and we're probably going to be driven to be less than the best version of ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, I laughed that as you read that, Sharon, this morning on the way to school with my third grader and second grader. We got to have the retrospective what went right and what went wrong this morning
mm,
conversation. And there was
mm,
more in the what went wrong category, actually, from every person in our family.
Mm,
uh,
mm,
and we were out of routine. One of them was excited about a field trip, and just excitement led to needling of sister.
mm,
Sister did not respond well. Daddy did not respond well, and so we got to have the okay. I talked to God. You talk to God. We'll just work it through on the truck ride to
mm,
school.
mm,
It happens, and some of that is coming from the fact that mornings are rough. for
mm,
my wife,
mm.
and that means that they're just rough for the family too. I don't mean rough in terms of like she's a terrible person in the morning, but just like mornings are hard for chronic pain and
Pain.
illness folks a lot of
Yeah,
times,
sure.
and so that means a lot falls on me,
Yeah,
and it was a rough go.
yeah.
So, like, but coming back to that, you're gonna sin. I
Mhm,
think like we have to give ourselves permission to be who the Bible says that we're gonna be.
mm,
In First John 1, John talks about how if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves.
mm,
I think sometimes
mm,
we can read that in being like the big category of sin, like I am a sinner. But I want to read that actually in moment to moment as well. If
mm,
if I say that I have no sin in response to my wife's chronic pain and illness, I deceive myself.
mm,
But then the very next promise is if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so acknowledging that like we're going to sin, it gives us permission then to hold on to the promise that God will forgive that if we confess it. And then we do what we did in the truck this morning and trace it back and say, okay, how do we get here? How do we
mm,
learn from this? What do we need to grow? How do we need to monitor ourselves and our own hearts?
mm.
So I think that's what I was getting at when I wrote that section there, Sharon.
Yeah. Yeah, and those of you who are listening, we're talking a lot about God and the scriptures, and I just want to encourage you if this sounds foreign to you, or maybe you go to church, but it's not clicking with you. You may not know Jesus as your Savior. You may not even understand what Nate is talking about when he talks about the hope we have. The good news, the bad news is we're sinners. The good news is we're sinners because Jesus came to pay the price for our sin and open up his heart to us and not just give us the confidence of eternity with him, but also a place to run when we find ourselves in such a hurtful, turned upside down world. It is a place to run. But as Nate said, that doesn't mean that we have all the answers, but it means that we have a savior. And we would love to have the privilege of sharing with you what it means to know Jesus. And so you can contact us through markinc.org. That's markinc.org. But I just want to make sure because in our culture, we talk a lot about God in a very general way. And we know what we know. We're talking about someone who has a relationship to Jesus, has that access to our Father in heaven. And we want you to have that access to our Father in heaven through Jesus. So please, if you're confused and thinking this is my head is spinning, I don't know what they're talking about, just get in touch with us and we would love to share the gospel with you. So Nate, we are, man, I could just keep on going and going, but
mhm.
then people wouldn't have to buy the book. So
Right.
we want to book. And I want you to get this book, and I mean
Mhm,
it, Salty Peanuts. We just touched the surface of what Nate has shared so transparently with us about his family and his own personal journey. And he says in his book, Kate's story is her story. And Nate, I loved that. I
mhm,
loved that you said
mhm,
that this is you're not talking for Kate, you're talking for you and your transparency. So I do want to tell you that there is an appendix. It's like a bonus in the book. It's called Sexual Intimacy, Chronic Pain, and Illness. And we could take. I mean, we could take a minute, Nate, and why don't you tell us just a little bit about what you share in that appendix?
Sure. So, as you mentioned in the introduction, Sharon, I wrote another little book with a wonderful female co-author called "Help: Our Sex Life is Troubled by Past Abuse," and
Mm,
I do a fair amount of counseling with couples that are just working through challenges in their sexual relationship. And chronic pain and illness is one of those things that, for some individuals, given certain maladies, can be
mhm.
deeply challenging. And for Christian couples, we believe that God's good design is that sex is a beautiful gift for married couples, and that there aren't other sexual avenues that we can explore. That's not God's path of flourishing for us, and we do harm when we do that. And so, Song of Solomon also says, "Let love sleep until its proper time."
Mhm,
And one of the reasons it says that is once sex becomes a part of life's rhythms, it's hard to turn it off. Um, and that can be a point of struggle. And so I wrote that little appendix. It's a very short conversation, I think with maybe 4 points and two principles or two action
Mhm.
steps or something like that. Can't remember exactly how I structured it. Uh, with just some background truths of recognizing that, hey, just speaking to caregivers here, it may be that you're very frustrated that sex has become non-existent or difficult, but recognize that that's a point of frustration for your spouse too, that they would prefer not to be here,
Mm.
and to ask the question, what are we able to do right now? This is going to revolve around the couple's conscience and what they're comfortable with and all sorts of things, right? But the question is, what are we able to do that expresses physical intimacy and closeness?
Mhm.
Um, and that may not be sex, but what are we able to do that still has the physical touch aspects of it that's helpful for us?
Yeah.
And then I lay out some different ideas and principles there. It's not a particularly detailed uh,
Mm.
appendix there, but I do want to brag on the publisher for a second. I think some of my favorite things in the book are the fact that there are those two appendices. The one is about sexual intimacy, and then the second one is an appendix for the non-Christian reader.
Mhm.
Um, as I know that people people run for words that are helpful, and in the caregiver space, there's not a ton of help. And
Mm.
so, again, like you said, Sharon, if you're listening to this and you're not a Christian or wondering where you're at with the Lord, I'd encourage you to read that appendix as well. The fun thing, there's when you publish a book, the publisher says this many words, no more, and the
Mhm.
publisher actually allowed me to write a longer, actually, violate those word count in order to put those two appendices in,
Mhm.
because we really do believe that Jesus is the hope of the world, and that means that He's the hope for any individual who's in a caregiver space, and
Yeah.
He's also the hope of the world for people who are experiencing sexual frustration and seeking to live in a pure and righteous way.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was great that you went right there,
Mhm.
and made it, a talking point,
Mhm.
able to talk to your spouse about it. So thank you for that. I do hate to wrap up, but we are going to wrap up. And I want to tell you again that we are talking with Nate Brooks and about his book called, make sure I have it right. I keep wanting to say Journey Disrupted, but it's Disrupted
Other way
Journey.
around, yeah.
Disrupted Journey, which is perfect for the topic that we've been talking about. Heidi Nequist is here with me, and we are just, Nate, so grateful that you have joined us and given us extra time to just dig a little deeper into going into your book, but a little beyond it. I appreciate it. And like I said, salty peanuts. If you want more, and I think you have to want more because we just went on the surface, really. I think there's so much more. And it's the kind of a book where you want to underline and you want to think about it and you want to go back and consider a little bit deeper some of the things that Nate has shared. So, Nate, as we wrap up, would you just talk to that person, caregiver, or the one who is hurting, that needs the care? What can you offer to that person? Just talk to that person about the hanging on for the next step, the next day. What advice, comfort, encouragement would you give?
I think the first thing is just that know that I really respect you. Um, One of the most terrifying statistics that I ran into was that 80% of marriages where a wife has a chronic pain or illness, the husband
Mm,
will leave.
mm, wow.
And and that's incredibly sad.
Mhm.
And I don't speak that as like a statistic of doom. I speak that as a statistic of, if you're caring for your spouse, you're doing something that is, or another loved one, you're doing something that is unusual in our
Mm,
culture. And I'm so grateful for your determination to live out the vows that you've made. And
Mhm.
that's worthy of honor. And it doesn't mean that it's not sorrowful and a struggle, but getting up and doing this every day is a declaration that Jesus is real
mm,
and He lives, and so can I.
Mhm.
mm.
And so thank you. Um, There's a lot that can be said, but I think that's just where I'll leave it. Thank you for being the kind of person that is living out the gospel of Jesus Christ with your life.
Mm.
Beautiful.
Thank you for those words. And I have a feeling that there's someone who's listening who's has tears running down their cheeks because of the tenderness of what you just said. Again, you have been listening to the Help and Hope podcast produced by Mark Inc. Ministries, and our guest is Nate Brooks, and Heidi and I are the co-hosts, and we are just, again, so grateful for Nate for being here. You can go to markinc.org, that's markinc.org, where you will find more stories like more Help and Hope, designed to help turn your heart toward Jesus. Lots of free resources that we know are going to encourage you and equip you and help you to walk by faith. That's markinc.org. We hope you'll pass this on to those that you know who would be encouraged by it. And again, check out our other resources at markinc.org. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to being with you again.